So, good evening, everybody. If you're in Central Europe, good morning. If you're in Ross's part of the world, um, and wherever else you are, hello. And so let's get into what we've been looking at throughout the conference. So, first of all, I'm Reg Butterfield, and for quite some time, I've been collaborating with my colleague, Dr. Ross Worth, on the nature and working of organizations. And some of you may have visited our earlier presentations. On Tuesday, we set out the historical context of organizations and an outline of current change models and approaches. These were followed by the introduction of organizational principles as a means of management earlier today or last night, depending on where you were located. We're now going to put this together and introduce you to a new approach to organizational design and management that is very different to that of the bureaucratic hierarchical model used by many today. Before moving into the main agenda of this presentation, I want to thank all of the presenters who have joined us in this marathon conference on change. What has impressed me is the mix and range of approaches that are evolving in this continuous and complex world of change. The professional approach by the presenters and their audiences' reaction and their questions have reinforced my faith in the people I'm proud to call colleagues in the worlds of change management, project management, and OD. I haven't managed to watch all of the presentations yet, and certainly will watch them all. Those that I have watched seem to be future forward thinking and to a degree challenging some of the current thoughts and approaches to change. None have said what is happening now is wrong. They are just helping their audiences to look at things differently and use whatever aspects that they believe will work for them. There are a few observations that have really stuck with me so far, and I want to just mention them now because they relate to what Ross and I have been researching and our current result, which I will demonstrate in a minute. Colin Davis said that the 20th century model of organizations and leadership is mechanistic and is all about the person in the role and not the role for the person. And that sort of stuck with me, and I think it's a very important thing for me to remember. Other presenters have also looked more at the holistic nature of people and organizations in various approaches, ranging from the health of the workforce through to new models that look at situations from different perspectives. There seems to be more focus on the people as people and not part of a machine, which I personally find really refreshing and important in a world of increasing robot to human interfaces, something we've all got to learn to live with more. All of them encourage us to have an open mind and take the opportunity to add alternative perspectives to our mental models that have served us well to date. None of them say that their way is better than others. It is this approach that Ross and I take in offering our ideas today. It's not our prescriptive way for the future. We offer our proposal as something to be considered when deciding about how organizations will operate in the future and the changes to the way organizations work if they are to remain relevant in their business or service world. Here we go again. Yeah. We call this different approach futocracy. And I won't go into the details on how long it took us to get to that name, but I can assure you it was a very long, convoluted process. We're not saying that bureaucracy is wrong or inappropriate. When Weber and Fayol introduced their ideas of organizations and management, they were needed and appropriate at that time. In some situations, they may also be true today. Current organizational designs are built for control and not work. Hence, they are very difficult to change or to improve their responsiveness, irrespective of the catalyst or source for such a change. We are not so naive as to say there can be organizations without any form of control. It is what control means in the context of what is needed in this time and space, which may be different if we designed for work as opposed to control. Our approach is to design organizations for work. In doing so, we argue that it changes the whole dynamic of an organization, as we will demonstrate today. It's not a prescriptive structure or model, as this would tend to restrict its use to only particular types of organizations. It's more a set of building blocks based on the use of principles that help move the organization from the traditional, predominantly bureaucratic design based on organizational control to one that is designed to support organizational work. When this is the case, it involves things like distributive control, distributive decision-making, and a move from strict linear objectives more towards outcomes. The challenge that faces organizations is to move away from the current paradigm that tends to move organizations from the original entrepreneurial excitement and freedom to a situation of managed control. And this is why we have developed the organizational approach called Feutocracy. In order to help set the scene, to discuss the what and the how, we will use a pretty standard organizational design that is found all over the world. It is one that develops over time and has many constraints built into it from an early stage of its development. Our research indicates that it is a natural process and inherent in all organizations as they grow. We will start with this process of growth and then demonstrate how to relate this to our proposed new form of organization. Traditional organizations may look good on their charts with the hierarchical dots connected and the clear rules to support that structure. The question is, can they last in the current business and social changes? Organizations, like flowers, have a lifespan. As organizations grow and become more successful, they tend to develop into a hierarchical, bureaucratic format. Whilst there is nothing wrong with such a structure and way of working, experience shows that the development of a different mindset based on power and authority tends to develop amongst managers. This leads to business units becoming what are commonly known as silos, with the loyalty of the staff tending to be more towards their immediate senior as opposed to the organization itself. This competitiveness spreads into the teams themselves, with managers having to spend time putting out the fires rather than concentrate on the real work in hand. In order to ensure that the focus is on the organization as a whole, top-down management tends to occur, and decisions are encouraged to be escalated to the next levels of management. Reinforcement of operations is made through fixed processes that lack flexibility and provide very limited autonomy for the workforce. The rigidity and controlling nature of such an organization is very much of the industrial age model and is lost and struggles to cope in the emerging world of the industrial age, from the industrial age to the quantum world of business. In its effort to remain competitive and to either keep up with or try to get ahead of its competitors, this type of organization tends to use episodic change processes. These processes are infrequent, discrete, discontinuous, planned, and intentional. Today's business environment, it's all about change. This change is a continuous process, and the days of episodic change arguably are over. New organizational forms need to take this into account. So now is the time for a different way of thinking and a new way of working, and Feutocracy is just that. Feutocracy is aimed at developing organizations that are future-proof and where change is the new business model. In the rest of this presentation, we will outline the Feutocratic approach. In doing so, we will briefly explain what the functions and how they work. More detail will be the subject of future publications. A Feutocracy is based on principles and not structural adherence. This means that it's flexible and can be adopted from startups through to global organizations. There is no one fixed model structure or operating system. As we go through the elements of Feutocracy, we'll use a common model as an example for illustrative purposes. However, this model is based on an important principle of no more than 3 levels of organization. It is important to state that the outcome you see today is not the only outcome that our approach creates. It's just one example to show the differences between the classic hierarchical triangle and how such an organization can be developed for the future. In this example, we will start with a typical hierarchical and bureaucratic organization. It has at least 4 levels and a complex system of management. We now transition this organization into an illustrative model of 3 specific levels. Each level will be discussed in more detail later as we progress. The CEO moves to level 3. This is the level for executives such as the CEO, shareholders, members of the board, and so forth. The management level in blue moves across to level 2, which is the purpose alignment team. As you will see later, this is not necessarily the same people and the same skills that move across. The remainder of the organization moves across into levels of work groups, of multifunctional teams, and is a collaborative network approach. Finally, an important component of such an organization is the role of the network weaver. We will explore each of these important elements in more detail as we progress this evening. The lines shown on the screen are indicative and do not represent the role of line management. This is very important. They are discussed in more detail in the following sections as we progress. Before moving on, this organization construct has 3 levels. Level 1, the collaborative work groups or teams. Level 2, the purpose alignment team. And level 3, the CEO, shareholders, and board. We will now explore the different areas of this organization in outline. Because every organization is different in the way that it works and its focus of operations, we will not go into detail at this stage. In future publications, we will go into detail so that irrespective of the nature of your business and the size of your organization, you will understand how to use the Futocracy approach to building your future-proof organization. Level 1 is an appropriate combination of collaborative work groups or teams. These work groups can, where possible, take on a full multifunctional team approach with their own form of leadership. Depending on the nature of the organization, the work groups will have a project or functional outcome focus. In some organizations, they may want to have some specified teams, such as those in the illustration. We do not recommend this approach as a standard. They will be encouraged to have an entrepreneurial mindset and operate an effectuation approach towards their work. The traditional causation approach to work is not only restrictive, but can lead to significant missed opportunities in this changing world of business. Level 3 is where the whole context of the business is set. The CEO, together with shareholders and the board where appropriate, set the organization's purpose. Why is it in business? What does it do? Who does it? And who do they do it for? And how they deliver? In order to achieve your organizational purpose, this level sets the organizational targets and associated metrics that create the organizational work activity and outcome focus. An increasingly important function of level 3 is that of an external network weaver. This is a high-level environmental analysis process where level 3 executives become involved in high-level discussions with their external networks in order to identify current and future trends, new laws, and anything else that provides opportunity or future constraints for the organization. In effective organizations, this already takes place. Unfortunately, our research indicated that too many executives are involved in day-to-day activities and firefighting to carry out this important activity at the necessary level of effectiveness. In order to break this link with operations, a Feudocracy level 3 has no day-to-day relationship with the operations of level 1 work groups. For some, at that level, this would be a shock. We have reached level 2, which is between level 3 and the operating level 1. Level 2 is the purpose alignment team, which is where the major departure from traditional approaches takes place. We will now gain an overview of the functions of level 2. The level 2 purpose alignment team replaces all non-level 1 team management roles. It is a strategic functional level of the organization. The emphasis of the purpose alignment team is one of being a team. This is absolutely crucial. The membership of the purpose alignment team is dependent on the nature and focus of the organization, which can be public, private, or non-profit. For example, the most knowledgeable and experienced people in manufacturing, sales, R&D, HR, finance, and so forth. Although this demonstration may indicate that the current executives move across into this purpose alignment team, this will probably not always be the case. Many will be too used to the silo control approach, and many may also not have the requisite skills required of this new role. In some organizations, the executives are in place because of their contacts as opposed to their ability to be experts and, importantly, team players. The team reports directly to the level 1 executive. The purpose alignment team has no direct management role. I repeat, no direct management role. And as such, does not manage the level 1 work groups. It sets out the principles that guide the operation and decision-making of level 1 work group managers. It sets enterprise targets and in doing so aims for operational optimization. And by identifying true value drivers, the team sets out the program management and strategic alignment of the level 1 work groups. The team keeps ahead of trends through its own external networking and information from level 1 and 3. And in our research, we found that this level in particular was so involved in fingers in management that they seldom took the opportunity to take on this more executive function. The underlying principle is mobilizing and moving the right resources to remove constraints and deliver the results. This is an activity of collaboration that the silo management of current models often neglects because of the intermanagement power plays that go on. In essence, some may refer this team as being a hidden enterprise control team that leads by example in collaboration. It achieves this through the internal network weaver role, blah, blah, which we will now explain. The network weaver is an equal member of the level 2 purpose alignment team and is maintaining a collaborative network of multifunctional teams. This includes building a new relationship as the work groups increase or are reduced at the end of a project, for example. Removing or redirecting redundancies is an important departure from many other network approaches where the focus tends to be about continually building the network. So let's look at this role in more detail. The level 1 collaborative network of work groups and teams is the most important day-to-day element of the organization's business. As such, the monitoring and maintenance of the network is crucial and covers a wide range of activities undertaken by the network weaver. And it's suffice to say here, this may be more than one individual depending on the nature and size of the organization. The network weaver is a full member of the purpose alignment team at level 2 of the organization. The Network Weaver role and its application is far more complex than we have time to discuss in this video, in this presentation. The following is an overview of some of the major aspects of the role, and more detail will be provided in our subsequent communications and on our website. The Network Weaver has no line management authority. It is primarily a network coordinating and mapping process that includes evaluation where appropriate. A critical part of the process of network mapping and evaluation is to work in alliance with the Level 2 Purpose Alignment team. In doing so, the Network Weaver will provide feedback in both directions between the Purpose Alignment team and the organizational network regarding matters such as governance, structure, and coordination. This enables the Network Weaver to leverage the points in the network that require activity, such as improved coordination or change. Extensive use of IT systems and other technical support systems, such as AI, will be a prerequisite for all future organizations, irrespective of their design. In the case of a futurocratic organization, it will be available throughout the organization. The Network Weaver will monitor these processes to ensure that communication is happening in line with the needs of the business in accordance with the communication principles. Where there is a dispute amongst the Network Weaver has the role of dispute resolution, which is also part of the coach and trainer roles. I'd like to emphasize here the coach is not a coach in the traditional of an executive type coach. This is a strategic coach. And there is a very big difference between the two, which is very, very important when we look into how this works. So far in this presentation, we have outlined the core functions of the Futocracy approach to organization design and operations. The complexity and varying nature of business dictates that a more detailed introduction and discussion of such an approach cannot be demonstrated in the form of a short presentation. Over the coming weeks, we'll be introducing articles and other media to help inform at a more detailed level. It is also our intention during the first half of 2021 to invite interested parties to an online conference that focuses on organizations of the future, where workshops will be introducing the different elements of Futocracy. Before coming to a conclusion, we will now show you how a process of change or integration can be used to move from a traditional organizational format to that of a Futocratic approach. In this example, the process we show a situation where an organization using the Futocratic approach has purchased a more traditional company and wishes to integrate it into the main parent organization. But this process can also be used to move from an existing hierarchical traditional organization into a Futocratic one. Now, very often when an organization is purchased, it's about developing new skills and new mindsets to expand the type of work that the organization's doing. So for example, if you're in the auto industry and you've focused on traditional internal combustion engine development and so forth, you may then want to buy a company that's more into the electrification of the auto industry as a quick way of developing the skill base in your organization. So you've purchased the organization, and the head of the new organization you've just purchased is either going to join you with the executives, or in some cases may actually leave the organization completely. But the important thing is that the management now start to take on the new form of the level 2 and 3 approach to Futocracy. And in doing so, the purpose alignment teams can start to communicate with each other under the direction of the central head of the organization. And so we have this parallel link, if you like, between two purpose alignment teams. And then as you start to understand how the Futocracy works, you can start experimenting with some teams and set up a minor network weaving operation within the newly acquired organization. And again, learning from the parent partner organization purpose alignment team and network weavers, you start to understand how the philosophy and the operations of the organization work. But you're still maintaining your overall basic way of working at the moment, with a couple of new approaches being tested. And as you gain the experience and the network weaver starts to develop the connections needed between the teams within the purchased organization and the existing organization, then we can start to look at bringing other teams carrying out other types of work and start to connect them into the network locally, and if necessarily to the parent network. And as over time you get used to this way of working and the network weaver system starts to develop in a much more comprehensive way, the traditional hierarchy is gone, and we're now into a parallel form of feutocracy. Now, some organizations will stay like this. If you remember, for those who listen to Ross about the higher organization where they have micro business enterprises, well, this is a feutocratic form of a sort of a micro business enterprise. And you could run two systems like this that are connected together through the purpose alignment teams and plugged into the executives. But most organizations tend to want to bring the organization into one form. And so over time, this is what you do. So that you now have this much larger feutocratic organization, and each of the level 1 work teams and functional groups will rise and fall, come and go, depending on the nature of the work and the processes within the organization. So we've looked at this. Organization is based on principles. Collaboration is the underlying business process, and I really cannot emphasize that more than it really is an underlying business process. The purpose alignment team is at the strategic level, which is where management in the past tended to get too involved in day-to-day operations and seem to lose sight of how you work together as a team rather than as silos. And the feutocratic approach would not allow that separation. It has to be at a team level. Effectuation is the preferred approach to work because it has the opportunity to identify different ways of doing things and identifying things that we could miss in a traditional causation approach. Day-to-day decisions are made at the most appropriate position. And this is where the principles of decision-making are very important, so that people know in which area they have the opportunity to make decisions and how they can focus those decisions for the benefit of the organization as a whole. The network weaver, as the coordinator, is a very, very important role and will take a very special type of person. And continuous change comes about because of the flexibility of the level 1 work groups. So our way of operating in a post-industrial age world is by moving where it's appropriate from a traditional bureaucratic organization more towards the concept of feutocracy. Okay, so I will stop the screen share, come out of here.
Okay, and the questions on the chat start at about minute 22, if you want to scroll down to there.
Hang on, I haven't got the chat up yet.
Let me go ahead and I'll address the first one.
Okay.
Relative to the level 3, which is the executive group not interacting. Again, this is designed to separate the functions relative to the levels and really get past the intermixing of that happens in a traditional hierarchy. This is actually rather applicable in the startups too. The challenge though is when you go from a startup, oftentimes what you're looking at there is a hub and spoke model. And that operates rather efficiently because there is a single point of decision making. The challenge is through growth. How and at what point does it become too burdensome on one person to really run everything, all the decisions? That's the key where they've got a decision to make. They normally go ahead and take the hub and spoke and start branching from the spokes themselves. The key is to keep from doing that because that starts to embed control into a traditional hierarchy. That's the opportunity where you can actually start to think about how to then start distributing decision making and how to start to integrate the top big picture as well as the purpose alignment to pull things together. Now, when you're going through that initial stage, obviously there's going to be multiple roles, and some people may have multiple hats as it's going through a transition just to the number of people that are involved. But it's a thought process of really thinking that when growth happens, how to distribute the control versus distributing and through delegation of that control. So it's a thought process at a critical point in growth. And when you actually look at some evolutionary models, there's some old evolution and revolution type of models. That's a critical point where some decisions need to be made. And that's where this opportunity comes in.
Okay, there's a question here from Christina, and it's, where are we? Purpose alignment teams, are they built around specific topics, around problems that need to be solved, or around functions? I would argue they're not really built around any of those in the normal sense of what those terms probably mean. It's the nature of the people that are needed at a strategic level to achieve what the organization's purpose is. And so if it's about design, then we need some people here who are really experts and really understand the business of design, who will be able to set out the outcomes and so forth of the project teams that they will want to undertake this work. There will be some central functions that may be part of the purpose alignment team, again, depending on the organization, or they may actually devolve those within the multifunctional teams themselves, depending on the nature and the size of the organization. So the performance alignment team is made up of the people who we need at a strategic level, who have the experience and understand how at a strategic level to deliver the purpose for level 3 and meet the metrics and the desired outcomes of level 3.
One comment is made that this is similar to the way independent contractors come together to staff projects. That's really true. The challenge is most projects are designed as a discrete beginning and end, and you're calling together the necessary resources to put together the necessary competencies. The challenge, though, is how to do that as an ongoing basis. And that's where the purpose alignment team really takes the role of not just doing it once, but doing it as an ongoing activity. Similar to the way a single movie might be put together, multiple contractors coming together for the duration of the movie under one person really organizing that network. But if you're doing a series of movies, then you have an opportunity to keep configuring that network over time from one activity into the next.
Yeah, if I can link into that, spend a lot of time looking at project management offices throughout the whole history of project management offices, because they have a very checkered history, and some of the attributes of a project management office, particularly an enterprise project management office, are within the performance alignment team. And so we've really gone into some significant detail to try and identify how we can overcome some of the inherent problems of such an approach as a PMO, and at the same time use the strengths of it throughout the organization. And this is something that we will be discussing much later in how we came to these conclusions and how they work on a day-to-day basis. But certainly project management has a deep root within Feutocracy.
Yep. One question is, why even have an executive leader? I think that comes back to what is the role of that. And oftentimes there's a regulatory role, and that there has to be, under the governance of that nation, some top person. But at the same time, there's really the role not as an internal control function, but really as an external view, external networking. That becomes a critical component as to how is the organization going to be moving forward from a very, very high level. And again, if you think about it not as directives being pushed down into the organization, it's really different roles at different levels of worldly view, you might say, from a very, very big external point of view to organizing the internal down to actually doing the work, the purpose of the organization.
Yeah, if I can link in here, I can give you an example from my own experience. Some years ago, a company decided to sell off its main company to a Japanese organization. But their research and development, which they saw as a sort of cost to the organization, they decided to let a management buyout because they thought it would die. And what happened is the person who took the executive level for this buyout of this research and development, they split that into 4 organizations. And the executive at the top said, look, I'm not going to get involved in any day-to-day operations. That's what you are required to do at your level. I'm going to meet you twice a year where we would discuss where the business is going, where the purpose of the organization and so forth. That particular organization is now one of the most productive and profit-making organizations in Austria. The parent company that sold it off and was bought by the Japanese no longer exists. And that model is still being used today. This need for executives at the top is very important to chart the journey and the purpose of the organization in the bigger picture, and then let the executive level, this purpose alignment team, get on and deliver. So they're not encumbered with day-to-day management stuff. They can actually do what is necessary at that strategic level to achieve what the executive sets them.
There's one question on the documentation of decisions. This harkens back to a holacracy and sociocracy, which is heavily involved in documenting all decisions. In this particular case, the decisions are being distributed to the people who have a vested interest, but also they're making those decisions in consultation with people who are directly involved. So to the extent that you need to communicate the decision is really embedded in the decision-making process itself. And to the extent that something is being left out, that's where the purpose alignment team could look at the overall network connections, particularly the communication connections, to make sure that those connections are in place and are working. So while you may not know everything in your part of the world, so to speak, you know what you need to know and have the ability to know additional amount through the network.
There's a comment by Andreas here. What would you say are the main differences between the model and the matrix-based organization models? I think there's a very big difference. In matrix models, you tend to end up with 2-line forms of management and all the confusion that goes with. There are battles over resources and so forth. Here, we don't have this management responsibility. The resources are dealt with in a very, very different way. And the team of managers in the people in the purpose alignment team work together so that you're working for the organization's outcomes, not fighting your turf to maintain your expertise in this field and share your resources and so on. This is done collectively on a team based, whereas most matrix organizations that I've ever come across, this is an ongoing battle that just drains the organization's energy.
The question on finding and building the right competencies. This really is addressed easily by what Hire does in their micro enterprises. If you have the autonomy to run as a small business within a network, you can make the decisions yourself at that point, knowing the impact as to the overhead you're generating within your unit. Same as if the micro enterprises were in fact true separate entities themselves. So there's a built-in mechanism of the people who are actually involved are able to identify what competencies are needed and then how to hire it. But at the same time, they don't necessarily have to do all the HR functions themselves, because HR as a staff function could be its own separate service provider elsewhere in the network, so that you get the HR not necessarily making those decisions, but truly complementing and providing the processes to aid the hiring manager in that process. So again, it's a thought shift of how to do everything in one big organization, but decentralize those decisions across the network itself.
The question here from Carlos, which this is about transforming into an agile structure in an IT execution organization. And then you've got issues with financing. When you move in IT organizations to agile, there are major problems in the current setup. The Scrum Major is very often seen as a problem by the line management, and the struggles between those two are very often the cause of it not actually working as it should do. The finance people are not engaged in the day-to-day business. The finance people, the job of the boss of finance is typically, if shareholders are involved, to get the best for the shareholders, not necessarily the best for operations. They've got this tension all the time. And so by bringing in the finance within the purpose alignment team, they've got a joint responsibility now in terms of the operations of the whole organization, because if that's not working, there is no shareholder value. And so they start to see things differently. And when the great discussion earlier by Michael McDoodle, my great friend, was around the culture of organizations and so forth, we also have these cultural issues around different functions within organizations, where they look at the same issue through different lenses, and one sees it as an opportunity, another sees it as a problem. And those are the discussions you need to have in the purpose alignment team, so that you have a collective understanding of what's important and how we achieve it. And if it's decided that that particular team or group cannot have the funding they need, then they will jointly understand the implications of that. At the moment, it's still being fought from different agendas in silos, and this helps to break it down.
A question on workforce retention and redeployment, particularly as it's changed. If you think about it, this is happening regularly right now. During any type of disruptive change, there may be major realignments and people need to move around. And there's a number of ways that's being done. Hire does it as a routine operation, in which case, if you've got surplus people, they actually have an entity that absorbs them and makes them available as needed resource across the organization. And basically, it is a separate function looking at the best utilization of the people that are available and how to move them through the organization, or how to ease them out of the organization, same as often happens with outsourcing to an outplacement organization. So functions like this are possible, but you need to think about, they don't necessarily have to be made by just that one unit. They can use other parts of the organization to fulfill some of that activity.
Okay, Gary, I love this question. curious how to see how early detection of weak signals from the external environmental scanning would be handled. And this is about the Network Weaver. Again, it depends on the source and what those signals are. One of the key parts of the Network Weaver is to ensure that the collaboration within the teams and the feedback mechanism to the purpose alignment team is working, so that if there are weak signals, we then have a principle of how we deal with such signals. Is this left to the team because that weak signal is about something that's unique to the environment that that team's operating in? And so you then have this discussion with the team itself to say, what's the implication of that in terms of the work you're doing now and the work in the future? And then when you come to the answers to that, or you get some clues to that, you then say, well, how's that going to affect the rest of our network, the people who are in the R&D or in the production or wherever it is? And so the Network Weaver makes sure that that discussion takes place. And then it may be that this signal is actually really not of much interest to the organization at the level 1 level, but at level 2, they might like to explore this within their network to see how weak is that signal and what's the reality of that moving forward. And I can bring you an example here where in the auto industry, there was what they call the things, turbos. There was a period where turbos just went off the scene. And so the research people just pushed that away. But there was one organization said, well, no, actually, we see further down the line where other things are going that this will come back. And of course it did. And they were really the leaders in the industry for quite some time until the others then caught up. And this is what we're trying to capture. Is that weak signal weak because it's not going to happen? Or is it weak because it's not on our current agenda? So that's how we see the process working.
Anna asked a question about how does this compare to centers of excellence, which is actually an interesting question because we went down that road at one time. Yep. When we were looking at the challenges that organizations face and looking at all the different structures, we did some study of how organizations oftentimes alternate back and forth between centralized and decentralized. And as a compromise, you might say, the matrix organization came into place to try to blend the two together. But it's only a one-off step to go from a matrix organization to a centers of excellence, in which case some staff functions are centralized within the decentralized operations to serve the entirety. So again, this is somewhat similar in that you do have a center of excellence. The key, though, is at that center of excellence, does it have to report to one operation, or can it support multiple places? In which case, if the center of excellence is in a decentralized location, that can easily be split off from that location and serve multiple entities across the network itself, basically moving from a matrix to a center of excellence to a network itself. It's just how you draw the reporting lines and how you connect the purposes between those different entities.
There's one here from Terry McDonald. Can Feutocracy be used to design a system of firms as a group of national cooperative organizations where each of the firms remain as independent entities? It really depends what you mean by independent entities. I would say yes, because it could be a micro organization that's linked at the purpose alignment team if they're trying to cooperate and work together with their own system of teams and groups, as I showed in the last part of the presentation. And I think this is a really important thing to look at further, because as we get into the circular economy, we need to plug into other micro organizations and even major organizations that are dealing with elements in the supply chain that maybe hitherto we've never really taken much interest in. But because of the world of the customer is changing so quickly towards sustainability and so forth, we now have to plug in at different levels, whether it's R&D, whether it's how we do the production. So we need to plug into the people who use our stuff and how we can look at packaging and all sorts. So I would see that they are also moving more, and I'm doing quite a lot with the circular economy in how we develop that in particularly in Europe. And so I see them plugging together, and Futocracy allows this very quickly and easily, because we can go out from our network into other networks very, very easily, either at the purpose alignment team level and or at level 1.
Okay. A question comes up of how would you locate some of the legally required functions? These are generally regulatory in nature, and I think you'd get into the weeds too much if you try to purposely put them in one place. Same as right now, dependent upon the role of those regulatory positions, some are centralized, some are decentralized. So I think that rather than make a predetermined location of how you organize it, you need to really look at it situationally for that particular organization. Where does it fit best? Should it be centralized as its own entity to support multiple parts of the network? Or is it something that is very location specific and needs to be within a particular node of the network? So again, I caution against overly prescribing the structure, because it needs to look at it from a principle of where things fit best.
It's I think a very important question here in terms of how we develop this. This is Janet Mari. In transitioning an org to this model, is a new outside person best to put in the weaver role for fresh eyes and perspectives? In German, we would say Jein. Yes and no. I think it's not about the where the person comes from. It's whether they have the requisite ability to achieve the role of the network weaver. And this is something that is quite a complex person, an experienced person who is able to coach at the strategic level, is able to see the unseen, hear the unsaid, and really using their senses, understand the business that they're in, and many more attributes. And that can come from both within inside and outside. And it may be a combination of both, depending on the organization and where it is in its development. So there is no one simple answer for that one. It's about appropriateness of the person as opposed to focusing too much on whether that role should be internal or external.
Question on the network weaver role and sustainable change. I think this comes more of, it's not just a network weaver, it's really the entire purpose alignment team, in that they, by being removed from the day-to-day operations, they have an opportunity to really personally network across the organization, find out what's happening, what the challenges are, and then look to see where there's some consistency of challenges or where there's disconnects within the current operations. So it's really not getting into the detail of purposely networking just for networking's sake, as much as it is to figure out what's happening in the organization. And this gets back to a lot of the things that organizations too often fail to do because they're involved in the firefighting. If you take the purpose alignment team out of the firefighting operation, they can then have the luxury, you might say, of seeing the big picture and address those issues and bring in the level 1 as needed to basically address those bigger issues.
There's one from Bill Burnett. Who polices the purpose? Who polices the purpose where teams make an independent decision that would move away from the established purpose? Well, actually, I'm not sure how often that would happen. I know you get strategic drift under the project management systems where project teams love working together, so they create work and it moves away from the business and things like this. The thing about using principles for decision making, it's very hard to break out of the purpose of the organization and have a legitimate decision. And this is where the monitoring of the way the teams are working, the communication and other measurement systems that are built into the system, together with the Network Weaver, is really, once you get going, I think this is very unlikely to happen unless someone is really deliberately trying to move the boat in a different direction. And that will be picked up quite quickly, because the principles really are very, very strong here. The decision-making principles are all related to the purpose of the organization.
Okay, I'm not sure I understand some of these. One is the hidden control. I'm not sure where that comment came from. Some of it goes back to what might be in the dual operating systems construct of Cotter versus the higher platforms, and that there is a control system operating, but it's not necessarily hidden. It's not centralized and delegated. It's within how things are connected and aligned. So we might be having some type of not necessarily misunderstanding, but word usage in this case.
Hans Ulrich, you mentioned the issue of product owner. You mentioned it in agile teams, but I think product owner in general is a very important aspect here that has become, I don't know, some battlegrounds in many organizations in terms of who's actually really responsible for this product, and what does product owner really mean? It depends on the organization. Some may actually give the team that's responsible the role of being the owner of that product, which may be a subset of the bigger product, or it may be the only product. And this is why if it's a multifunctional team, you can set up a multifunctional team that actually owns that product. And they are moving in the direction where the purpose alignment team have identified where they want those products to be focused. Yeah. And so it really does depend on the type of organization and what product means in their context.
One question comes of, is this similar to the chief of staff role? I think changes like that are almost something that's tacked on to a traditional organization to try to solve some of the problems. And I guess we prefer to solve the problems at the core and not try to solve the symptoms with an add-on to an organization. So to the extent that somebody is seeing a chief of staff role to coordinate and maybe troubleshoot some of that, is an indication that the structure itself isn't resolving those problems within how that structure is designed.
Yeah, and you talk about the hidden control enterprise. That's just a use of words. It's not hidden. It's known by everybody in the organization. But it is a form of control center. It's not called that because it's not about control in the normal sense of the word. It's about aligning the purpose and the resources. And so, yeah, that's just a word that I've put up there. And if it's caused confusion, thanks for the feedback. I'll remove it.
So someone asked if the Network Weaver group on LinkedIn is us. No, but I am a member of a couple Network Weaver groups that are on LinkedIn. But for the most part, those are actually made up of nonprofits. They are separate entities that are forming networks among themselves to solve common problems and share resources. So to some extent, what's happening with the nonprofits in the global arena through their network weaving activity is somewhat similar here, in that they're coming around common purposes, but they're doing it more informally than a formal linkages, other than in maybe one or two cases, there are some key people that are performing a particular role of making connections. So the network weaving, is being done within a formal approach in many of the nonprofit arenas.
Okay, Janet Marley. It's about the workforce retention. Ross and I had long discussions over this about career development and all these sorts of things. I think we now need to start thinking about what work means and what career development means in a very different way. And if you link into all the different HR discussions in this area, there's no one quick fix, because increasingly work is about what I get from it as a person in terms of personal satisfaction. And when I was a youngster, my dad said, "I don't care what you do for a living, as long as you've got a pension at the end." Well, that day's gone, long gone. And so the youngsters are now taking in their own hands their own careers. And that may mean not actually coming into the team as a full member of the team of the Furtocracy organization, but being an external member, a freelancer. And this is why networks also are very helpful here, because you can adjust it more within the evolving new approaches to what careers and management and employment means. And in terms of work satisfaction and retention, all the stuff that I've read on this particular area, and from my own experience of being the boss of 7,000 people at one point, it's all about the environment. If the good old Hertzberg's hygiene factors are there and you create an environment where it's really meets the needs of the people, then they will stay. And I think Furtocracy gives us this opportunity, because it's team-based and functional-based in the functional team and group perspective. Each team, together with the network weaver, can develop that particular environment that's appropriate for what they're doing. And it's not a one size fits all across the organization. It's the appropriate environment for the work that they're doing, which may be very different from a marketing project to some other technical project. And so these are the things we need to look at differently now, from the person rather than the organization.
A question comes up on lessons learned from Holacracy. Going back to the presentation yesterday, we examined a number of alternate structures. And in Holacracy, there is an advantage of being able to delegate decision rights and clarify decision rights. So there is the distributed decision making, but it's done in a delegated way. Also, when you looked at what they did, to some extent, they really did not network as much as they looked at the organization from a different perspective. If you look at a traditional pyramid organizational structure from the side, everyone understands that. But when you look at it from the top down, it almost looks like a massive hub and spoke with multiple branches along the way. And Holacracy and Sociocracy basically took that top-down view of the organization, and instead of looking at each person individually and reporting, they just group people into work teams. So some of that fits in the way they organize the work teams and the way they centralize within that work team some decision rights. But at the same time, they did not really go into a true network. The relationships through the hierarchy still remains. The only difference is that instead of having manager relationships up and down the organization, they become circle connections. So again, this is indicative of a lot of what we studied in individual cases, is that there's things to learn, but also things where there's some issues. In particular, the change from a bureaucracy of decision-making to a bureaucracy of decision-making process and documentation. So to me, I like part of it, but at the same part, I would hate to operate with that much bureaucracy on decision making and documentation itself. That would be very difficult for me. Okay, Anna, you mentioned Center of Excellence 3. Send me more information. It sounds like you're talking about a more specific instance of Centers of Excellence than I mentioned before. The future of OD.
Yeah.
We've talked about this before, and I actually mentioned it in the discussion earlier today, which was actually last night for me. The question comes is, if the change becomes truly a competency across the organization, what is the role of the change specialist? And this gets back to, when are change specialists called in? And too often they're called in when the process has already been started and resistance, and they're called in to really try to clean up the mess. They're rarely called in early to prevent some of the messes. But if you delegate the decision-making process and the ability to change across the organization, there should be less need for that. But at the same time, there may be a shift back to the original organization development focus, how to help the organization make sense, how to make those connections, how to see things different, such that it moves away from change management back to organization development as an area of specialization. Okay, Reg, I think you have some opinions on that also.
Yeah, I mean, they're more or less what you've said. I guess it depends on where you place yourself on the spectrum of OD. If you go back to my beginnings of change, which was in OD, which was basically sitting down with people with a cup of tea and talking about the meaning of life and how it affects the way they work. That is an ongoing process in Foodocracy. This is where the coaching, the strategic coach element, is not just about getting the most widgets and things like this. It's also listening and talking to people, and so this in itself is a form of very early OD, is helping people make sense of their world and how we bring about the changes, and you can then sort of link through the network, having similar conversations and bringing people together so that they understand it from similar perspectives or understand each other's perspectives. But if you go down the more modern version of OD, then it's getting a bit distorted in my world, and moving more towards change management rather than traditional OD. And so that's where I sort of link in with what Ross was saying there. It becomes then a case, maybe one of those rare cases for an episodic change. But I would see those would be very rare if the network weavers are doing their work properly.
Okay, at the end here, Catherine has a point on identity in mission-based. I don't know if I fully understand the issue there, because the identity becomes a line of sight from what you're doing to the purpose that's overall. So to some extent, identity needs to be connected to purpose, and we're trying to make that more explicit versus trying to make it, which oftentimes is an identity within a silo itself. Also, when you look at some of these instances, particularly of higher organization, when you release people to make the decisions that they see needed, and you give them the opportunity to network and make things happen, they release great passion in their jobs because they're no longer being controlled to do somebody else's bidding. They are really entrepreneurial at that point. So in many cases, the identity then is within that local entity, but it's also tightly connected. You also get what's interesting, and I've faced this before in the oil industry, within brand, there's a brand at the refinery that's pushed down into that brand is used by distributors, which are pushed down to the street level, used by local convenience stores and gasoline stations. So technically, you have a brand identity, but you're operating under three very distinctive levels for that brand. And this gets back to how do you coordinate the purpose of that brand across all three levels, and how do you orchestrate the communication? And in many ways, this is happening within Futocracy also through the network linkages and the communication linkages that helps break up some of the isolation, you might say.
There's an interesting one here. Catherine Schrepfer, is it? Or Schrepfer. Excuse me if I've mispronounced your name. How would you rate the importance of sense of belonging? I witnessed that people working more and more in mission-based teams, 2 to 3 at a time, they state that they lack the feeling of home and feeling of belonging to a team. How would this look like in Futocracy? Well, first of all, I think it's important to try and make sense of the words in terms of mission. What does the mission-based mean? What does a mission statement mean? Even between America and the UK, there's almost a 180-degree turnaround between what mission means and vision means. And this is why purpose is really important, because this is not about wishful thinking. This is saying this is what we do, this is why we do it, this is who we do it for, and this is how we do it. And if you belong to that purpose, which is the main function of the whole concept of Futocracy, is it's a purpose-driven organization, then you really will understand where your part is in that organization, and how you, with your network of your colleagues in this collaborative network, how your part fits into all the other parts of the jigsaw. So I would actually say that it reinforces this sense of belonging. It also gives people a feeling of control of their day-to-day work and contributing to the overall purpose of the organization. And this is one of the fundamentals that Ross and I were really looking to get into this approach to organizations, because it's really missing in today's organizations.
Gary asked a question on an organization such as Visa and how that network has evolved over the years. I've done some study on this in the past, but I have to admit, Gary, I haven't done it within a deeper dive recently relative to what we're thinking now. And that's something that I may put on my agenda to take a look at again, because there is some similarity. I see that, particularly in the area of identity as well as the decision-making process. But I have to say I need to revisit that because it's been a while since I looked at it.
Yeah, I think the question from Gary about the implementation of Zappos, how would that apply? Zappos has found very quickly, and sadly the owner, the originator of Zappos sadly died this year, or the end of last year, at a very young age, which I think was a great loss to the business industry with his ideas. One of the things he identified that Holacracy lost when they moved to Holacracy was the people side. It was all about how to achieve the organizational side to such an extent that they had to set up a sort of a parallel part of their business model to bring back the people side that was so important for him. Futocracy doesn't do that. It's a people focused. We come from the work side, and the work is by people. Okay, we've got a few robots and other things coming in, but it's still fundamentally a people-focused approach to business. And I think that's a fundamental difference. And it's an important one, because Zappos lost a lot of good people in the process of losing the people side of their model.
And part of what we're looking at is is often missing in what other people are proposing for future organizations. A lot of times they look at the end state. We've spent a lot of time talking about how to transition to the end state. And part of this comes back to the basic principles of the structure and the design and the options that you have within those principles, such that you can lay out the possibilities, but you don't necessarily mandate a particular structure at any point in time, particularly as you transition from a traditional hierarchy, or as you grow from a hub and spoke type of model.
Yeah, Bill Burnett, he raises the point about the strong peer culture obtains when effectuation is for the organization versus a particular project creates resilience in facing success or failure of a particular project. And again, this is where the effectuation approach is so important. Yes, we want every project and we want every part of the business to be successful and to achieve whatever that purpose is. But people make mistakes. There will be errors. And the whole approach of the Network Weaver is not one of judgment. This is why they have no line management role. It is about support. And if the risks were taken that were within the principles, then okay, risks happen, mistakes happen. Let's learn from it, spread it around the network, see what the others can learn from that particular mistake and move on. Because the success of a project is also contingent on so many other things. Even the partner organization you're working with on the project, they may have people there whose raison d'etre is to sabotage your project because they feel threatened by it. And you have no control over that. So you try different strategies and so forth, and yet you still fail. And so that's why this effectuation approach and the role of the Network Weaver working together is very, very important.
Responding to Hans, I'm not personally familiar with the A2F model, but I've made a note to myself to look at it further. We continue to, might be, you say, stumble across other activities that are along a similar path, and we continue then to investigate those to see what we can learn as we continue to add detail to all of the content and how it all fits together.
It's refreshing to see some of you actually agree with what we're saying. Ross, I mean, how about in the last 10 minutes, we let people unmute and ask questions and
okay.
Yeah,
go ahead, because we've run through the chat. Feel free to unmute and jump in with a comment or a question.
We got Annette here, Shakehead, who's put the hand up.
You answered it, so we're good. Thanks so much.
Okay. Any other question you've got, Annette?
Yeah, this is Bill Burnett. I have another question. Actually, I asked it in the chat, and I'd asked it, I think yesterday, and you had said it would be covered today, which is, how do you resolve disputes between people and between teams in your model?
Okay, this is really, again, where the Network Weaver really comes in. And this is why the skills of listening and sensing and so forth are so important. My experience of disputes tends to be people aren't sitting down and talking to each other and listening to each other. They tend to be telling each other, not listening. And this is part of the Network Weaver's role is, okay, if we've got a dispute here, let's have some form of, not arbitration in making sense of judgment or anything, but let people talk it through and agree a way forward. And the more you do this and the more the collaboration works, the less disputes you have, because again, we're purpose aligned now. We're not fighting our silo turf wars that historically and still today people are doing. And so this is one of the keys to what you're asking, Bill.
Okay.
Yeah, it's interesting. Are you familiar with how Morningstar Tomato does it?
Yeah. It's actually an interesting organization, isn't it?
Very interesting. And the way they resolve disputes is, I think, very clever in that, they, first of all, because of their structure, everybody interacts as adults. So there's no parent-child role in that organization. And if you're in dispute with somebody, you're expected to, as an adult, to resolve that between the two of you.
Absolutely.
But that doesn't always happen. So if it doesn't happen, then you bring in a third party who listens to both sides, but doesn't arbitrate, right? Just gives feedback to the two sides and tries to come to resolution. And if that doesn't work, then they put together a committee. And the committee then listens to both sides and gives their input. And if that still doesn't get you a resolution, then it can go to the CEO, who also does not want to make a decision. But if you're in a dispute and you can't resolve it between the two of you and you have to go to the CEO, which in Morningstar is a legal requirement to have a CEO, you're not behaving very maturely. So there's a lot of effort to solve the problems between the two parties. And they say that it doesn't reduce disputes. It's just you don't see them because they get resolved between the two parties and never gets escalated.
Yeah. For me, this is classic OD, getting people to sit and talk to each other.
Right, but it's a formal process, and that's what makes it work. Right.
Yeah. And I've no problem if that's the way that the organization wants to resolve things, by setting up the principle of this is how we will, with the network weaver, resolve such disputes. That's okay. The important thing is that, and it's interesting, no one's come up with it, which I expected to happen, is at the moment it looks as if there's no line management, because level 3 is not managing level 1. Level 2 is not managing level 1. The network weaver isn't managing level 1. So there is no line management in the context of a traditional organization.
I'm going to ask a question here soon, so I'll probably unmute.
Okay.
Gentlemen, I have a question. Most of my consulting has been with large organizations, global organizations, Fortune 500 organizations. And what I see as unique is Toyota, in that their org design is based on the unique demands that they have to face every day. And their structure is at the first level, they have folks in plants who work within cells, whose job is to do the work, analyze the work, assess the work, and identify problems or opportunities to improve that. We move up another level, their job is to support down and integrate across a plant. You move up another level, their job is to integrate with outside folks, suppliers, myriad of suppliers. Move up another level, they look at contingency planning, disaster recovery. Another level, they create the future. They divide the organization into people that are directly involved in that flow. And then another part of the organization would be responsible for supporting that flow. Those folks supporting the flow, human resources, IT, engineering, ergonomics, they're assessed on their ability to respond to the demands placed on them. If they were to move to your model, how would you go about convincing them that that's the right thing to do?
First of all, I wouldn't try to. I've worked at Toyota, and as you probably know, if you're there, the whole of the top management has changed radically. Many of them put out to places where they sort of retire and go to grass because their approach was very out of date. I wouldn't try to, because the Japanese way of doing business is very, very different to probably many of the companies that people work with today. Korea is the same. Korea has a very, very different approach. So I wouldn't try and convince them. I would say, look, this is how you can do it differently. Let's look at how you do it now and the reasons for it. And is it an option for you to look at it in this direction. And if the answer is no, because this works for us, that's great. If it's, well, actually, we've not thought of that, let's explore it, then that's even better. So I wouldn't try to fit Toyota into that. Whereas if you'd have asked me about Suzuki Maruti in India, I would say, yeah, that's a very purpose-driven organization. Its purpose is to give the best customer service throughout the world all the time, and they've won every customer focus survey and whatever award for the goodness, I think it's about the last 15 years. And when you go there, everyone is focused on the purpose and they all work together. And so the Suzuki and the from Japan and the India, two sort of ways of looking at the world, have come together quite nicely there. So it really depends for me on what type of organization it is, what it's trying to achieve, and whether it's willing to look at another way of doing it.
One of the questions that came up a little bit ago in the chat was breaking up the power structures. I think we need to rethink of why those power structures exist. And oftentimes it comes down to a turf war that's almost implicit in the way the hierarchy is built and the silos that seem to almost default on those structures. But it also gets down to, what is the power? Is it the power to control? Now, if someone really likes the power to control over other people, they're probably not going to have a good fit within Futocracy, but they probably also don't have a good fit in any organization because no one's going to like working for them. The key is, would you like to have power over influencing something much better and bigger? So if someone were to actually move from that middle level of an organization over to serve on the purpose alignment team, they're going to lose the power of control, but they're going to gain so much more of actually influencing the bigger picture. And if someone is truly achievement oriented, that's going to really release passions that had previously been consumed by corporate infighting.
If I can pick up on that, Ross, because it depends on what generates power and what the need for power is. In the saying has always been, if you've got the biggest budget, you've got the most power, and things like this. And the idea of Futocracy is to break out of this mindset. It won't be about the biggest budgets. It will be about the purpose alignment team, making sure the resources are used effectively. So there is no budget power. Then you look at position power. Well, the position power's gone because we're not head of silos. We're part of team members now, and so forth. And so the whole concept of power and the dynamics of it change. Now, if it's about pure narcissism and I need to control everything, then we have to question whether the person is worth employing.
Yep. Okay. Other comments or questions? We are coming up near the end of this 90-minute block of time. When we conclude here, we're going to take a short break. I will have lunch. I'm not sure about others.
I'm going to have dinner.
And then at the top of the hour, we're going to reconvene in the Wonder Room, and we're going to try some experiments there. We can continue this conversation here, or we can break out into small groups, or just experiment on how to use the Wonder Group as a collective. Any other questions or comments?
Oh, I have a ton of questions, but perhaps the Wonder Group is the place to ask them.
Great, Bill. I look forward to them. And Mike, did I answer your question? I was a bit concerned we may have left that a bit abruptly.
You did. I'm hesitant to endorse any one size fits all. And I think when we design from the outside in based on the unique demands, that may look very different depending on what that demand is.
Agree totally. And that's why level 1 is not fixed. It's totally flexible. And so love to continue the discussion in the Wonder Room in half an hour's time, if you've got the time and the energy.
I'd love to.
Okay, hopefully see you there in half an hour.
All right.
Okay. From
Bye-bye.
my perspective, I really appreciate these conversations. As we've talked before, Reg and I have challenged each other rather intensely over the last 3 years to get us to where we are now. And we appreciate the feedback and questions from others to help us make sure that we are able to communicate our thinking, as well as see where there might be some soft spots that we need to explain better. So we really appreciate the feedback and the interaction we get in these sessions. Reg, any concluding comments?
Yeah, no, I would really repeat what you've just said, and I'm really grateful. And not only do we want to make sure we've thought things through, we want to find where the holes are. What are the things that we haven't thought through or we need to think through in more detail? Because we've been doing this together. We've tested a few with other organizations and bosses around the place. But the challenge now is in the final presentation of everything and writing it up. We've written up quite a lot. So we're really grateful for your feedback, warts and all. Yeah, we're not looking to provide excuses or judgments. We just like to get feedback.
Thank you, everyone, and hope to see you in half an hour in the Wonder Room, and let's see what we can do there. Okay. Bye-bye.
Enjoy your lunch, Ross, and I'll have my dinner.
And you your dinner.
Speak to you later. Cheers.
Bye-bye.